Welcome to the special edition of Brass Tax. We're coming to you live from the CNN News 18 and Federal Bank Primetime Studio. I'm Zaka Jacob. The Union Budget for 2024-25 has been presented, while the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has done a tightrope walk by appealing to broad sections, whether it's youth, farmers, women. She has also managed to stick to fiscal prudence and also kept the capital expenditure at a record 11 lakh crores. There is a big thrust on youth. There are multiple incentives, whether it is for first-time employees or interns. As far as states are concerned, Bihar and Andhra Pradesh have taken a bulk of the stated allocations. No surprises there, given the political compulsions of a coalition government. But the markets have reacted negatively to the rise in both long-term and short-term capital gains tax. So the big question is, both economically as well as politically, how does one rate this budget? Just a side note, the Finance Minister has now created a bit of a record of sorts for being the minister with the highest number of consecutive budget presentations, 7 budget presentations, including the one today, going one up on the 6 consecutive budgets that were presented by Morarji Desai. But let's talk about Budget 24-25. How is it going to be rated? First, we'll be joined by a group of top economic minds to try and parse through the details. What's in it for you? We'll try and make sense of the taxation slabs, whether it is on personal income tax or whether it is on long-term and short-term taxes. Particularly, there has been a lot of talk about this removal of indexation on real estate assets. Dr. K.V. Subramaniam, Executive Director at the IMF, will be joining us, former Chief Economic Advisor. Naina Lal Kidwai is former President of FICCI. Suman Berry, Vice Chairperson of the Niti Aayog, will be joining us, and Kiran Majumdar-Shaw is founder of Biocon. And then at 9:30, we will have the full political face-off on this, because you can't keep politics separate from any budget presentation, least of all this one, the first one in a coalition regime, as it were. The big face-off, two of the most articulate faces on either side of the political divide, Jay Panda of the BJP and Shashi Tharoor of the Congress, facing off at 9:30 p.m. But first, the highlights from Budget 24-25.
This scheme will provide 1 month wage to all persons newly entering the workforce in all formal sectors. Two announcements to make for those opting for the new tax regime. First, the standard deduction for salaried employees is proposed to be increased from 50,000 to 75,000 rupees.
ये बजट समाज के हर वर्ग को शक्ति देने वाला बजट है.
The main interest of the people of Andhra Pradesh is to rebuild the state, especially in terms of building the capital.
अधिकार के लिए मदद दीजिए, यहाँ के लिए जो जरूरत है बिहार के लिए, क्योंकि बिहार को भी आगे बढ़ना है.
दो मित्रों को खुश करने को छोड़ के दूसरे किसी को भी 140 करोड़ जनता को उन्होंने अलग रखा.
All right, let's first pass through the economic details of this budget, what it has for the middle class, what it has for youth and jobs, farmers, women, etc., and of course for corporate India. Dr. K.V. Subramaniam is Executive Director with the IMF and also former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Naina Lal Kidwai, former head of HSBC and now former President of FICCI. Suman Berry is Vice Chairperson of Niti Aayog, and also I'll be speaking to Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, Chairperson of Biocon. Let me start with you, Dr. Subramaniam. We spoke in the morning and, we were talking about how there's going to be a thrust on jobs. So from whatever you've heard in the budget speech today, whether it is the direct benefit transfer to first-time employees to the tune of 15,000 rupees, 3 tranches, the emphasis on internships, 1 crore interns in the top 500 companies, 5,000 rupees monthly to interns, so on and so forth. What is your first reaction to the deep emphasis that the budget seems to have laid on young people, particularly those who are on the verge of entering the workforce or are entering the workforce?
So, very good morning from Washington, D.C., Zaka. I am pleased to note the emphasis that the budget has placed on employment creation because I've always maintained consistently that for growth to be inclusive, it is extremely critical to create jobs, especially for the youth. From a macroeconomic perspective as well, when jobs are created, that helps to accelerate the virtuous cycle, triggered by private investment. Therefore, the emphasis on job creation is good. I will point out that the schemes that have been implemented now do draw on the successes from previous schemes, similar schemes. If you would recall the Rozgar Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Yojana during COVID, which had provided, the benefits, the provident benefit fund benefits provided by employers was taken care of. That had been successful in creating about 60 lakh jobs. So that has been, doubled down. Similarly, the ECGLS scheme, which actually provided credit to MSMEs, that has been, further enhanced as well. And the Mudra loan scheme, which has actually provided loans to entrepreneurs, increasing that from 10 lakhs to 20 lakhs again. So these are aspects that have actually worked well in the past, and the evidence is clearly there for them having worked. To have actually taken them further is, I think, very good, especially the emphasis on employment. I will point out a couple of other very important aspects that I find visionary as well. I think the removal of angel tax will be very critical for the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I think overall entrepreneurship is important for solving India's problems. Now we have the third largest ecosystem, and I think that will benefit. At the same time, from an ease of doing business perspective, the proposal to reformulate the direct tax code, I think, is really critical. I will remind our viewers that there was a committee that I was part of when I was in the government, which submitted a report in 2019. A draft tax code has been already written with significantly lower provisions and significantly lower, number of pages. Because the current act is a 1961 act, 83 years old, with lots of amendments. So changing that will also help really on the ease of doing business. So overall, I find it a visionary budget.
Narilal Kidwai, what is fascinating about the budget, and I guess this is where it is commendable to some extent, is yes, there were coalition compulsions. The opposition's talking about how much of a disproportionate allocation states like Bihar and Andhra Pradesh have got purely for political reasons. Yet at the same time, and then of course there are the compulsions of having to address all of these constituencies, whether it is youth, jobs for youth, first-time employees, whether it is women, 3 lakh crores that have been allocated for women, whether it is farmers, so on and so forth, which are again all because of political compulsions, perhaps arising out of the mandate that came last month. But at the same time, I guess where it is commendable is the emphasis and the commitment to capital expenditure is pretty much the same. It's 11 lakh crores plus. So the commitment there showing through. And yet at the same time, maintaining fiscal prudence, 4.9% of GDP for this fiscal, and the finance minister explicitly saying that by 26-27, we will be 4.5% or lower than that. How does she manage this tightrope walk?
Amazingly, I have to say. I must say I was in the school that was a little worried, despite the huge commitment the government had made to staying the fiscal deficit glide path, that political compulsions may have given them a little more leeway in this budget. But they have stuck with the path very strictly, indeed improved on it, and done this with putting forward a bunch of welfare schemes. And of course, a lot of this comes from the confidence of revenue and tax collection, but also from an economy that is in growth mode and the revenues that come as a result of it. So for every step we see that goes into direct benefits, or indeed into the welfare schemes, there are many programs and plans to push growth. And I think exactly as KV Subramaniam just said, the thrust on MSMEs, not all of it is new. Some of it is from good experimenting through the COVID years. But to bring in the programs as we see it on the MSME front, I think are important. The Mudra loans going up from now the 10 lakhs to 20 lakhs, based on the experience of the 10 lakh loans that were repaid And those individuals then become eligible for 20. So that is progress, making sure that the MSME sector gets attention through finance, the possibility of a credit guarantee scheme for SMEs. All of this helps with growth of sectors which do indeed provide employment as well. So it's about jobs, it's about economic growth, and there also tax collections that result from that economic growth.
Suman Berry, I do want to ask you about the reaction of the markets when the speech was happening and in its immediate aftermath. The Sensex, I think, was down about 1,000 points. Of course, by the end of the trading day, it did recover quite substantially, but did end in the red. To two factors. One, of course, the increase in both long-term capital gains tax from 10 to 12.5%. And then, of course, short-term capital gains tax also increasing from 15 to 20%. And there's also a bit of consternation, not necessarily linked to just the markets alone, but a lot of middle-class folks who are asking about this whole business of taking away indexation on real estate. You buy an apartment, let's say 20 years ago, at a fifth of the cost that you're getting right now, or maybe a tenth of the cost that you're getting right now. Why should you pay tax exempt of any kind of inflation adjustment on all the money that you make, or all the capital gains that you would make? Would you like to clarify on all of these things, because these seem to be sort of red flags raised either by the markets or by the middle class?
These are, not the kinds of things we worry most about at Niti Aayog. I think that what is it that they say about taxation? The art is to pluck the feather without the goose squealing. So, look, we are in for a period of significant fiscal stress. There is froth in the equity markets, as was signaled both by Governor RBI and in the economic survey. I think most reasonable tax systems try and have some equality between rates on capital gains tax and income tax, because anytime you have a uniform rate, you get out of classification issues. So I suspect this was largely driven by revenue reasons at a time when markets were doing pretty well. But beyond that, I really don't have an informed or professional point of view, including on the indexation of real estate. But what I think is the larger thrust, and this has been made clear in the economic survey for sure, less in the budget speech, is that there is a desire that the nation's savings, if I could put it that way, the corporate savings, should be directed to the very real needs of the economy rather than, as it were, speculative capital gains. That may have been part of the thinking, but so, I can't say that for sure.
Let me go back to Dr. K.V. Subramaniam on this. I think it's very clear for a number of fiscal years now that the government wants more and more people to move to the new tax regime, the tax-paying class, as it were. In fact, I think today the Finance Secretary said that at least as for this last financial year for which returns are to be filed till the end of this month, the figure that the government has is 70% have opted for the new tax regime. But then the worry here is this: there were savings instruments in the old tax regime, whether it is through Provident Fund or pension schemes or interest on housing loan, etc., which were for specific purposes. Is the government now essentially saying that, look, what you save, how much you save is your problem, but we want you to pay tax, a flat rate, an easy to understand simplified rate, but we're not in the business of trying to encourage you to save. That is your business.
I think, Zaka, I would actually characterize this as a process of simplification. You have to keep in mind, while in the new tax code, some of these exemptions are not there, but the tax rate is also significantly lower, at about 20% compared to the previous regime. So that is definitely good. Overall, having worked on the reformulation of the direct tax code, you would recall in 2019 there was this report, which in fact, has submitted a completely modified tax code. I can vouch for the fact that simplified tax codes are far better from the perspective of ease of doing business, at the same time, for tax collection as well. So from that perspective, I think this is something which is very good. The second, point, something that you were asking earlier, if we look at India's, demography, and here the emphasis on job creation is really critical. But when we look at the marginal incentive that is provided for capital versus labor in an economy like ours with such a young population, I think it is equally important to provide adequate incentive for labor and not skew it only towards capital. And I think that is how I look at some of the rationalization on the capital gains tax rates. Here, I also want to utilize this opportunity to appeal to industry bodies like CII, FICCI, and ASSOCHAM. Naina is here. I think she's been with FICCI and still has a very large voice with FICCI. I think it is really critical that the corporate sector focuses on labor-intensive employment, because there is a problem of commons that often prevails here, where individual firms think about, and oftentimes in a myopic manner, to substitute labor with capital. They may benefit, but overall the entire economy does not necessarily benefit, because if every firm actually substitutes labor with capital, that doesn't lead to adequate job creation and thereby demand generation in the economy. And that is why industry organizations like CII, FICCI really need to highlight that this problem of commons is something that must be overcome, so that every firm, especially the larger firms, focus on more labor-intensive growth that will help everybody, and in a more coordinated fashion.
So now part of that incentive,
part
of the incentive is also when you are going to, give companies back some amount of money for every new employee that they add to the EPFO rolls. So I guess that will help. Some of it will come from company CSR funds as well. But Nainalal Kidwai, the other sort of peeve that the government has had is that while the government is doing capex at 10 lakh crores, 11 lakh crores and so on, they are not seeing the kind of crowding in of private sector investment as they were hoping, at the pace and the scale at which they were hoping. Is there any reason for you to, look at this budget and say, okay, this is going to encourage, or this is going to kick in much more private sector investment?
So you're right. I mean, private sector investment has clearly been disappointing. And if the government hadn't played the role it had, we would really be in a dire spot as a country. The incentives that are coming through PLIs, which are in fact being lauded because they're showing directionally which industries government holds important, is certainly one way. And we are seeing as a result some capital formation coming from industry therein. And fortunately, to KV Subramaniam's point, some of those are in labor-intensive industries. I think industries like electronics, toys, apparel, textiles, leather, all this needs high focus. It's not always large industry that is stepping in here. In the case of defense and electronics, possibly. In many, it is MSMEs. And the fact that industrial parks are mentioned as an area of high focus absolutely helps MSMEs, because it provides the infrastructure, the logistics, some of the regulatory frameworks within which they can operate in a plug and play type of environment. And many of these would be in labor-intensive industries. And for every capital-intensive industry that gets set up, large ones and many, unfortunately, large companies in businesses like aluminium, etc., it's the nature of the business. 200 people are all you need to run a large plant that costs 20,000 crores. But for every one of these industries, there is a supply chain of MSMEs that get set up, both to service the industry or indeed supply. So it's all interwoven. But will this employment type of incentives of these amounts that are being mentioned help? I don't think large industry will feel the benefit as much as the more labor-intensive MSME industries will. And I'm hoping that that is where the thrust will happen in terms of multiplication of
Can I also
job
quickly ask you, ma'am, as a former banker, this whole sort of consternation around taking off indexation on real estate, long-term capital gains on real estate, even though the rate itself has come down. How do you see that impacting the real estate sector, specifically people taking loans to buy homes?
So, it can work both ways. The indexation helps old assets. The lower tax rate and the lower time period helps new real estate investment. So the new regime, clean, clear, simple to understand, no indexation, no hanging and holding your breath on what that indexation rate for the year is, could just mean that employees move faster through the system. An employee that today works in Bombay and tomorrow in Delhi doesn't think twice about selling an asset here to buy an asset there. So it could actually create more benefit in terms of rolling stock instead of people just hanging on to old assets because they were reaping some of the benefit of holding an old asset. So to each individual, there are clearly some that will be hurt, but there will be others that gain.
Okay.
And I think we don't have a clear sense, therefore, on what these new tax changes mean in terms of money in individual pockets.
So, Suman Berry, before the Niti Aayog, when the Planning Commission was around, the whole business was about how much allocation is given to which state. And today, I think this is a quasi-political point as well, which the opposition seems to be making, is that much of the allocation of resources, at least by way of budget announcement, a bulk of it seems to have gone to Andhra Pradesh and to Bihar because of obvious political compulsions. How do you speak to that criticism?
Well, I can't. So there are two parts to your question. One is what is given to Bihar and Andhra warranted? And the second is the implication of that the other states have been given, quote unquote, a raw deal. Now, the fact of the matter is that the bulk of these allocations do come from the Finance Commission awards. So that's the core of what gets distributed. Yes, there's a certain amount of discretion, as the budget has indicated, but there were sound reasons given in the budget for, as it were, assisting Andhra in the particular projects, both the capital and Polavaram. As I understand it, a fair amount of the support, certainly to Andhra, I'm less clear on Gujarat, is to come from multilateral development banks, which has the implication, A, that the resources have to be repaid, and B, that the best global standards will be applied to the planning of these and international procurement. Now, in the case of Bihar, I think clearly the Amritsar-Kolkata freight corridor is
industrial corridor.
Industrial corridor, I should say, is an important corridor, and I think that there was this other theme about, and quite rightly, reviving the eastern part of the country, which was also a point that was made in the interim budget. Because, look, in many ways, the most dynamic parts of the world economy lie to the east of India, and yet the paradox is that the more vibrant parts of the Indian economy are to our west. So it makes eminent sense to do what you can with respect to infrastructure, including this Gaya terminal, etc., and tourism, the eastern part of the country. It so happens that Andhra and Bihar also form part of that.
All right. Like I said, that's a quasi-political statement being made by the opposition. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Dr. K.V. Subramaniam, Nanalal Kidwai, and of course, Suman Berry for joining us. Earlier in the day, I spoke to Kiran Majumdar Shaw, one of the leading industry voices, particularly in the new age industry of biotechnology. I asked her about this whole booster for jobs, skill development, this thrust on first-time workers, people who are coming into the workforce, and what this may mean both for India's economic growth and also competitiveness on the global front. So this is my interview earlier in the day with Kiran Majumdar-Shaw. Joining us now is a leading industry voice. Kiran Majumdar-Shaw is chairperson of Biocon Industries. Thank you very much, ma'am, for speaking with us. What is your first big takeaway as far as this budget is concerned, particularly when it comes to the angel tax? I believe that's been a long pending industry demand. You must be thrilled that that's now been abolished.
Well, Zaka, the underlying theme has been about job creation through skilling and through internship programs at companies, both through government subsidies and CSR, which I think is the right approach in terms of creating jobs that are relevant and creating employability amongst the youth. As far as the government is concerned, it has always supported the startup ecosystem, which, as you know, is a very vibrant and growing ecosystem. And one of the pain points and eternal grouses was the angel tax. And I think the government has done away with it, which is, of course, welcome news. And I think they're expecting that this will spur greater investment into the startup ecosystem. And I think, entrepreneurship has always been the right model for India to pursue when it comes to economic development. I'm also glad that they've actually focused on entrepreneurship even in rural India by increasing the Mudra finance amongst the youth from 10 to 20 lakhs. Let's hope that that really creates jobs, entrepreneurial jobs in the villages. So overall, I think the underlying theme is about jobs and employment creation, which I think is really something that this country needs to do in a big way. And given the fact that India wants to attract some of the manufacturing opportunities to India, I think creating these kind of internship programs that will allow us to create the talent required for some of these manufacturing opportunities is the right approach.
One sort of red flag, at least from a market point of view, has been the increase in long-term capital gains tax and also short-term capital gains tax. Also, this concern about removing indexation from all asset classes, particularly from real estate. What do you make of that?
So, of course, they have marginally increased the long-term and short-term capital gains tax, which I think one ought to expect in terms of the way wealth is being created in the country, especially given that the stock markets are always rewarding investors. I think from that point of view, I think wealth creation is going to attract higher taxation, and it's marginal. In terms of indexation, I think we really have to see whether it's lopsided or whether it is got some kind of rationale behind it, because I think people are concerned that if the return on investment is low, then the taxation seems to be higher. Indexation seems to be creating these kind of anomalies, but I don't understand the sector too well, so I really don't want to comment too much.
Are you also, one sort of recurring theme of the Modi government's budgets in the past has been about capex and the increased outlay for capex. She's kept it at 11 lakh crores plus. At the same time, even though they've had to keep their allies happy in Bihar and in Andhra Pradesh, the fiscal deficit has actually reduced. It's 4.9% of GDP.
I think it's fiscal prudence. I think Nirmala Sitharaman has always focused on fiscal prudence, and she's done it once again. In terms of capex, I also want to focus on how do you get industry to invest in capital creation. And I think that's one area where I think I would like to see more granularity in terms of the PLI scheme, because there I think we wanted to make sure that the PLI scheme does continue in the sectors that they have identified, and increased PLI in these sectors, because I really think that you need much more capital investment in these sectors, especially the pharma sector. I'm also very pleased that research and innovation has got a good support from the government this time in terms of the 1 lakh crore allocation to this particular sector. Again, it remains to be seen how much of this is allocated to each sector, and we need to read the fine print in terms of whether it's going to come through grants, is it going to come through tax incentives, how is it going to come? But regardless of that, I think the fact that the government has recognized research and innovation as an important investment is music to my ears.
All right, one final word before we let you go. Again, I want to come back to the focus and the emphasis in the budget on youth, jobs, employment, whether it's the internships, 1 crore interns in the top 500 companies, 5,000 rupees for internships, 15,000 rupees in 3 tranches to first-time employees. Do you think there's now incentive enough? The finance minister used the phrase employee-linked incentive. Incentive enough to companies to start hiring, particularly at the entry level?
See, companies will only hire when they need employees based on the job opportunity, based on their business opportunities. But having said that, I think the government is looking at creating new job and talent for for the manufacturing opportunities that are coming our way from China. So I think when you look at a lot of the large-scale manufacturing jobs that need to be created, do we have enough talent? Do we have enough jobs? Skilled jobs is the question. So I think having these internship programs is the right way to go. So let's try and build these, opportunities in the right way. And I think the government is thinking about all this. So whether it is, greening the businesses, whether it is climate initiatives, whether it is abolishing the angel tax on startups, everything is about, how do we kickstart the economy and get investment going, and of course consumption going.
Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, as always, it's a pleasure speaking with you, ma'am. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18 on our special budget coverage, the Modi government 3.0. By and large, industry seems to have welcomed much of the announcements made in the budget, certainly when it comes to this whole focus on jobs, internship programs, the emphasis on employment and employability, particularly the entry level. All right, so we've discussed the economic part. Let's now talk the political part. As the BJP heralds this budget as a catalyst for Viksit Bharat 2047, the Congress has called this budget the Kursi Bachao budget, aimed at appeasing the BJP's allies in Bihar and in Andhra Pradesh, even as it is alleged that some of the parts dealing with youth unemployment, etc., have been copied from the Congress manifesto for the Lok Sabha polls. To try and decode the political impact of this budget 24-25, I'm now joined by 2 very articulate voices, one from the Treasury benches and the other from the opposition benches. From the BJP, Lok Sabha Member of Parliament from Kendrapara, Jay Panda, and from the Congress Party Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, Mr. Shashi Tharoor. Mr. Panda, let me start with you first. The Congress, and you've seen Rahul Gandhi's tweet calling this a Kursi Bachao budget, saying that only 2 states have benefited from this budget, which is Andhra Pradesh and Bihar, largely because the political fate of Mr. Modi's 3rd term rests on his 2 critical allies, Mr. Nitish Kumar and Mr. Chandrababu Naidu. How do you respond to that?
I think that's extremely cynical and unfortunate, because for 10 years, the Prime Minister has been talking about his focus on Eastern India and the Northeast. And he has indeed provided enormously increased resources to both the Northeast and the East. And so whether it is Bihar or West Bengal or Odisha or Jharkhand or Andhra Pradesh, this time the focus has seen specific large allocations which are going to be transformative in terms of infrastructure, in terms of many developmental agendas that need pushing along. So I think that's cynical, and that just should not be appreciated at all. Number 2, the major thrust of this budget has been on creating employment. And Shashi and I have been crossing swords on this, but I do need to point out that India has long had a challenge on creating jobs. And the holy grail used to be to create 1 million new jobs every month. And that holy grail was achieved during the Modi government so far. Let me give you some statistics. The State Bank of India's economic wing, based on RBI data, has put out the following figures. In the 10 years of the UPA government, 29 million jobs were created, whereas in the first 9 years of the Modi government, 125 million jobs were created. So, that's like 431% higher. And this is not just Indian institutions pointing this out. The Economist and many other foreign observers have pointed out that there has been massive job creation. So on top of that, to allocate lakhs of crores for skilling millions of young men and women and to provide financial assistance both directly to job seekers as well as to those who would employ them is a massive new paradigm shift. And that is going to set the tenor. India has already been the fastest growing large economy for many years now. And with this gear shift on an already large jobs creation track record, we are going to see a much better employment situation.
So let me ask Shashi Tharoor this. The opposition flagged this as the biggest issue in the election campaign, jobs, young people not getting enough jobs. So in this budget alone, a direct benefit transfer of 1 month's salary in 3 installments for those first-time entrants into the job market, a reimbursement of 3,000 per month to employers through the EPFO contribution for every new additional employee. This whole stuff about internship, 1 crore interns in the top 500 companies. They will receive a monthly stipend of 5,000 rupees. So this concern about jobs and young people not getting jobs has been addressed in this budget.
Well, first of all, let me just challenge Jay's numbers, because I'm a little perturbed when he goes around saying that 125 million new jobs have been created in this country, because no one can see these jobs and they don't seem to be paid very much, because certainly, as far as I'm aware of the jobs the RBI claims have been created, 47% are completely unpaid labor. We're looking at a country where youth unemployment stands at a shocking 45.4%, where graduate unemployment stands at a dismaying 44%. I don't know where Jay is getting his numbers from. The truth is, over half of men in this country and 2/3 of women declare themselves to be self-employed, which is as good as saying they're unemployed in many, many cases. The number of workers in the informal sector in the course of the last 5 years has declined by 1.3 crore. We're looking at a crisis in which the female labor participation rate in India has been plummeting, because whatever little work there is, men are grabbing first. And so it's gone down to 28%, which is far lower than any of our neighbors, lower than Bangladesh, lower than Kenya, Philippines, whatever, or certainly China. So we're looking at a situation where unemployment is critically bad. Now, you pointed to a few things that they have done, and I must say that I appreciate the fact that they have been very liberally borrowing some of our campaign ideas, which we're very happy to give them, except we wish they wouldn't dilute them. We talked about an apprenticeship scheme which would have actually trained people for a real job and which would have paid 1 lakh a year. They have reduced that to an internship scheme, which is just assisting people, and which would only pay 5,000 rupees a month, of which indeed some of that money is going to be coming from the corporate social responsibility budgets that would otherwise have been spent by companies on social ills. Now they're going to be spending it on their own benefit, as it were, of hiring their own interns. You talked about the 3,000 rupees EPFO contribution. I welcome that. But our idea in our manifesto would have actually given that as an income tax credit, which many companies would prefer to merely an EPFO contribution. The fact is that these are things that we can quibble about. I am glad this government is taking unemployment seriously, because that's what the Indian people want them to do, but they have not done it seriously enough. If these diluted schemes are the best they can do, and if the fantasy numbers they're peddling are going to be the data basis for what they're trying to do.
Jay Panda, one big negative from the market's point of view, and that's why the markets reacted negatively today, Jay Panda, was to the increase in both long-term capital gains tax from 10% to 12.5%, and also the increase in short-term capital gains tax to 20% from 15%. And there's also a lot of pain amongst the middle class about the removal of indexation from real estate when it comes to long-term capital gains tax, even though the tax itself has been reduced from 20% to 12.5% for real estate. Isn't this something that the government should try and address, this concern?
First of all, I want to clarify that the jobs numbers I actually cited my sources. Shashi has not cited his sources in trying to counter them. As I said, the Indian jobs creation track record is corroborated by both major Indian and foreign institutions. Number two, with this rationalization of the tax regime that's been going on. Even in the income tax for the salaried class, there has been some easing today in terms of what they can write off and in terms of the tax rates, especially at the lower end of the salaried category. Now, the reality is that capital gains did need to be rationalized. It's not a very major difference that has happened. In terms of indexation for real estate, the very big decision that has been announced in today's budget is to make real estate identifiable, to have GIS mapping for urban real estate, and to have digitization of rural land parcels. This is a very historic and a very major paradigm shift that's taking place. So unlike, for example, if you look at China, which has completely messed up its real estate sector, India has turned around in a very dramatic fashion. If you look at the real estate failures that used to happen between 10 and 15 years ago, they have turned around with passage of RERA and many other such steps. So, all of this has happened with the ongoing thrust on infrastructure. Now, we already talked about how the east of India deserves, because it had been neglected as a stepchild in many decades by the central government. That's getting corrected. And I can go on and on, but basically the gear shift in the job creation is what's going to be the milestone of this.
Shashi Tharoor, 2 points. One, despite all the coalition pressures and so on and so forth that you're criticizing this budget for, the fact is that capital expenditure is still kept at 11 lakh crores, which is the highest that we've seen in recent times. And yet at the same time, the fiscal deficit has been reduced to 4.9, and the finance minister has committed now in Parliament yet again that she will reach the fiscal glide path of 4.5% of GDP for the fiscal deficit eventually by 26-27. Shouldn't she be commended for that? And this whole business of, 2 states have taken the lion's share, Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. When you have the Amritsar-Kolkata corridor, obviously it's going to benefit Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, eventually Bengal. When you have the Hyderabad-Bangalore industrial corridor, that's going to benefit both Telangana as well as Karnataka. And these are all opposition-ruled states. So how can you say only 2 states have managed to get the lion's share?
The lion's share of special allocations, as you know, Zaka, have indeed gone only to those 2 states. And you've seen specific numbers being given to Bihar, where similar requests from Karnataka have not been honored. But we won't quibble over that. Every Indian benefiting is important. We just wish the government would remember that in addition to those 2 states that are keeping them afloat and in power, there are 26 other states and 8 union territories that also need to benefit. But I want to respond on a couple of things Jess said. First, he asked for my sources. The sources are the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy, CMIE, whose numbers are far more credible globally than some of the numbers his government has been putting out in recent years. Secondly, you talked about capital expenditure, Zaka, and I'm all in favor of capital expenditure. But how is it being spent and to what result? We are looking at the flagship infrastructure projects in this country crumbling and collapsing in the course of the last year. You've seen the deadly roof collapse on TV here in Delhi, in Delhi's airport. You've seen the collapse of canopies of 2 other airports in Rajkot and Jabalpur. You've seen 5 bridges collapsing in Bihar. You've seen the Mumbai Trans-Harbour link, which was inaugurated by the PM just in January, developing cracks, and the Pragati Maidan, inaugurated just in June by the PM, again flooded by seepage in less than 2 years. We're looking at infrastructure expenditure that has turned out to be feckless, hasty, and not enduring and not solid and stable. And therefore, I want capital expenditure that builds enduring assets for my nation, that creates infrastructure that every Indian can be proud of, not something that's collapsing and embarrassing us day after day. The same applies to railways. We talk about railways, we've had 2 major collisions, 2 derailments, and at the same time, a pathetically underwhelming performance in implementing the Kavach system, which have been talked about for so long by the government. So, capital expenditure, Zaka, to what end, with what result, and with what enduring value? That's what I'm really concerned about.
Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen, Jay Panda and Shashi Tharoor, for joining us. It's a political face-off, no doubt about it, and I'm sure much of this will come out during the debate on the finance bill as well when that begins tomorrow. Already, the opposition, like I said, is calling this a Kursi Bachao budget aimed at appeasing the 2 important allies in Bihar and in Andhra Pradesh. But the government says this is going to lay the foundation for Viksit Bharat, whether it is the 11 lakh crores for capital expenditure, whether it is the deep focus now on jobs and providing jobs to young people, whether it is through incentives like the internship schemes, 5,000 rupees to the interns, or whether it is the first-time entrance into the job market getting 15,000 rupees in 3 tranches, so on and so forth. Let's now, what we'll do is we'll take a break here on the program. This is the first part of our special edition of Brass Tacks. We'll take a quick break. On the other side, what's the global view on Budget 24-25 presented by Nirmala Sitharaman? I'll be joined by Sir Martin Wolf of the Financial Times right on the other side. This quick break.
Will cover 1. Land administration, planning and management, and 2. Urban planning usage and building bylaws. These will be incentivized for completion within the next 3 years through appropriate fiscal support. Rural land-related actions. Rural land-related actions will include 1. Assignment of unique land parcel identification number, UL PIN, or Bhu Aadhaar for all lands. 2. Digitization of cadastral maps. 3. Survey of subdivisions, survey of map subdivisions as per current ownership. 4. Establishment of land registry. And 5. Linking to the farmers registry. These actions will also facilitate credit flow and other agricultural services. Urban land-related actions. Land records in urban areas will be digitized with GIS mapping. An IT-based system for property record administration, updating, and tax administration will be established. These will also facilitate improving the financial position of urban local bodies. Labor-related reforms. Services to labor. Our government will facilitate the provision of a wide array of services to labor, including those for employment and skilling. A comprehensive integration of e-Shram portal with other portals will facilitate such one-stop solution. Open architecture databases for the rapidly changing labor market, skill requirements, and available job roles, and a mechanism to connect job aspirants with potential employers and skill providers will be covered in these services. Shram Suvidha and some.
Welcome back. You're watching Brass Tacks. We're discussing the Modi government 3.0's first budget, especially the first one after the mandate of 2024. What's the international perspective on this budget? Joining me on the show right now is Sir Martin Wolf, the chief economics commentator of the Financial Times newspaper. Thank you very much, Sir Martin Wolf, for joining us. I'm sure you haven't gone through the finer details of the budget yet, but one big broad thrust area seems to be employment, particularly employment for young people, and I guess this is in response to the mandate as well, where one of the big concerns was jobs for young people. Do you see this budget, directionally at least, having addressed that question?
Well, I have to admit that I haven't looked at this budget in any detail. I've been looking at it online, but remember, for me, this is still relatively early morning, and I'm actually writing a column. But as far as I can see, the broad thrust is sensible. They seem to be trying to tighten the fiscal position, which I think makes sense given the substantial recovery and the need for higher government savings to finance more investment. India clearly needs to raise its investment rate, public and private, further. Employment is clearly a very high priority for India. It has extraordinarily low labor participation rates and employment rates by international standards, including among other developing countries. And it clearly needs to generate vastly more jobs for both young men and young women, and indeed, I would say older people as well. So this is an enormous priority. It's a very difficult thing to do, to create stable, good employment. The organized sector has always been very bad at this in India, and I hope this budget will indeed mark a turning point, but it's going to be an enormous task.
All right. Now, one of the reasons, at least from the market's point of view, the reason why they reacted negatively, of course, they did recover a large part of that ground by the end of the trading day, was because of the increase in both long-term capital gains tax as well as short-term capital gains tax. But the view from the government is that if you have to fund all of these infrastructure programs, both physical infrastructure and social infrastructure, the money has to come from somewhere. And somebody's got to foot the bill, somebody's got to pay the tax for it, and therefore the increase in LTCG and STCG. Do you see that way?
That's a very good question. The capital gains taxes have certain problems. We know about that. But at the same time, the stock market is not very widely held in India. The people who've got immensely rich from the enormous stock market boom of recent years are a relatively limited number of people in the context of India's gigantic population. They're relatively well off. And it does seem to me that they can be expected to contribute to funding the government that is essential for both the political and social stability of India and its future economic progress. I don't see, from my very quick glance, that this is really unreasonable, and particularly given income taxes in India are relatively low, as far as I remember, and overall the tax burden is not very high. So I think it's something they just have to learn to live with.
And one final word, India's always, of course, aspired to be a high growth rate economy, creating jobs for its young people, wanting to be a manufacturing powerhouse, similar to what China did back in the 90s and early 2000s, and similar to what the Asian tigers did a little while earlier. What is it more that India needs to do if it has to get the Apples, the Samsungs, the Hyundais of the world to come and manufacture here in India?
Well, first of all, it is worth stressing that trying to get a democracy like India to grow the way China did is an enormous challenge. Just to grow at a good steady 5 or 6% is a pretty big achievement, particularly as population growth is slowing. So that means a faster growth, other things equal in per capita income. So getting towards 8, 9, 10 would require clearly an enormous shift. I think overall the investment rate in the country would probably have to get up towards 40%, which is what, 10 percentage points or so of GDP more. I can't remember the exact figure. This is both public and private. That would require much higher savings than now. It would certainly require a very considerable shift in the fiscal position. That itself will be a huge challenge. And then obviously you want to encourage, as you rightly say, inward investment, because that gives you cutting edge technology. Here I think the problems are, is there a predictable environment? Crucially, is there a predictable environment for foreign investors?
All right, so Martin Wolf, we'll leave it at that. I'm afraid we're completely out of time, but thank you very much for joining us. That's Martin Wolf, the chief economics commentator of the Financial Times newspaper, with his thoughts and perspective from an international point of view, looking outward into this budget. That's a wrap. If you've been tuned into this special coverage of the Modi 3.0 Sarkar's first budget. Remember, this is a budget that had to understand and that had to, of course, assuage some of the concerns that have been raised through Mandate 2024, whether it's jobs, whether it is young people and their livelihood concerns, middle-class issues, etc. And, of course, there is now the new political reality of allies in Bihar and Andhra Pradesh who also need to be addressed. That's a wrap. Thanks very much for tuning in. This is Rastax. We were coming to you live from the CNN News 18 and Federal Bank Primetime Studio. If you've been tuned in, thank you very much for your time. Good night. We'll catch you again tomorrow night.
Shram Suvidha and Samadhan portal will be revamped to enhance ease of compliance for industry and trade. Capital and entrepreneurship related reforms, financial sector vision and strategy. For meeting financing needs of the economy, our government will bring out a financial sector vision and strategy document to prepare the sector in terms of size, capacity, and skills. This will set the agenda for the next 5 years and guide the work of the government, regulators, financial institutions, and market participants. Taxonomy for climate finance. We will develop taxonomy for climate finance for enhancing the availability of capital for climate adaptation and mitigation. This will support achievement of the country's climate commitments and green transition. Variable capital company structure. We will seek the required legislative approval for providing an efficient and flexible mode for financing leasing of aircrafts and ships and pooled funds of private equity through a variable company structure. Foreign direct investments. The rules and regulations for foreign direct investment and overseas investments will be simplified to 1. Facilitate foreign direct investments, 2. Nudge prioritization, and 3. Promote currency for overseas investment. NPS Vatsalya. NPS Vatsalya, a plan for contribution by parents and guardians for minors, will be started. On attaining the age of majority, the plan can be converted seamlessly into a normal NPS account. Use of technology. We have successfully used technology for improving productivity and bridging inequality in our economy during the past 10 years. Public investment in digital infrastructure and innovations by the private sector have helped in improving access of all citizens, particularly the common people, to market resources, education, health and services. We will step up adoption of technology towards digitalization of the economy. Ease of doing business. For enhancing ease of doing business, we are already working on the Jan Vishwas Bill 2.0. Further, states will be incentivized for implementation of the business reforms, action plans, and digitalization. Data and statistics. For improving data governance, collection,
Climate change is on our doorstep. It's time for a revolution to take root. And it starts with 1.4 billion Indians. It starts with one tree for humanity, one tree for Mother Earth, one tree for a future. Project One Tree, a News 18 network initiative.
Statistics, different sectoral databases, including those established under the Digital India mission, will be utilized with active use of technology tools. New pension scheme. The committee to review the NPS has made considerable progress in its work. I'm happy that the staff side of the National Council of the Joint Consultative Machinery for Central Government Employees has taken a constructive approach. A solution will be evolved which addresses the relevant issues while maintaining fiscal prudence to protect the common citizens. Budget estimates for 24-25. For the year 24-25, total receipts other than borrowings and the total expenditure are estimated at 32.07 lakh crore rupees and 48.21 lakh crore rupees respectively. The net tax receipts are estimated at 25.83 lakh crore rupees. The fiscal deficit is estimated at 4.9% of the GDP. The gross and the net market borrowings through dated securities during 24-25 are estimated at 14.01 lakh crore rupees and 11.63 lakh crore rupees respectively. Both will be less than that in 23-24. The fiscal consolidation path announced by me in 2021 has served our economy very well, and we aim to reach the deficit below 4.5% next year. The government is committed to staying the course. From 2026-27 onwards, our endeavor will be to keep the fiscal deficit each year such that the central government's debt will be on a declining path as percentage of GDP. Land-related reforms and actions, both in the rural and urban areas, will cover land administration, will cover 1. Land administration, planning and management, and 2. Urban planning usage and building bylaws. These will be incentivized for completion within the next 3 years through appropriate fiscal support. Rural land-related actions. Rural land-related actions will include 1. Assignment of unique land parcel identification number, UL PIN, or Bhu Aadhaar for all lands. 2. Digitization of cadastral maps. 3. Subdivisions, survey of map subdivisions as per current ownership. 4. Establishment of land registry. And 5. Linking to the farmers registry. These actions will also facilitate credit flow and other agricultural services.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It was Budget Day in India, the first budget of Prime Minister Modi's third term. The focus was on jobs and allies. We'll bring you the highlights, talk about what's in it for the women of the country and why budgets must focus on women. Also, how you, the taxpayer, remain the golden goose for every government. And what was the verdict on the budget?